Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming along tonight. You'll come along to what is our 7th event of the Retrofit 24 programme. The Retrofit 24 exhibition is looking at the reuse agenda for cultural, civic and commercial buildings. A couple of bits of housekeeping, as always, before we start. Please can you just check your mobiles are on silent. And we've got no planned fire drills, so should you hear continuous ringing, please leave the room the way you came in, and the team will direct you out of the centre. So tonight the subject is creating community hubs. This is actually very dear to the building centre's heart for many reasons. The community aspect, the hub aspect, and obviously retrofitting, because we've got quite a considerable programme on that. We ourselves took this building over in the late 50s. It was derelict. It had been built in 1914 as a Daimler car showroom. Over the decades, over recent decades, we have repurposed this building. We are very much a hub now for the built environment. We have office spaces here on the upper floors. There's 24 organisations based in this building. From the likes of UK Green Building Council head office to the Construction Products Association to the Construction Industry Council and many more. We offer co-working facilities, mainly for start-up and small SMEs. We've got over 60 members of those. We have exhibition space. It's a venue space, and we obviously run an exhibition and talks programmes such as this, Retrofit 24. So the idea of a hub and working with the community is very important for us. Our outreach is also important. We are a subsidiary of the Built Environment Trust, which is a charity registered organisation providing education and cultural activities for the public and the professional people. So it's quite important for us, this community aspect. We are actively engaged with the community in terms of the Fitzrovia Partnership, which is supporting local businesses and residents with a particular sustainable agenda. So all this is dear to our heart, and obviously the subject of retrofitting is as well. And in that respect, we have undertaken a raft of measures to improve the performance of this building. We're not on gas, we are totally electric. We have solar heating. We have upgraded most of the windows in the building with secondary glazing. We have changed over to LED lighting throughout. We have water management programs. We're a net to zero landfill company. So we're trying to practice what we preach, and we feel we very much are achieving that. So much so, we have moved the energy performance certificate for this building from E to C. And we're working on particular projects now. So we are part of the Mayor's Climate Challenge, Business Challenge, to try and improve the building further. And this is on the back that we don't own this building. The building's owned by the Corporation of London. We are the tenant. So we are undertaking these measures at our cost, but we believe it's important in terms of decarbonising. So there's a lot going on. The community works for us, providing a hub, and obviously the subject of retrofitting. I'm going to pass you over to the chair for the evening in a moment. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this event, which are Buckley Yeoman, the Prince's Foundation, and RCKa Architects, so thank you for that. But I'd also like to extend a thank you to all the speakers for giving up your valuable time tonight. Natalie Thomson from Buckley Yeoman Architects is the Director of Strategy there, and she will be hosting the event tonight. Natalie has a breadth of experience both with refurbishment and new build projects across workplace, community and housing sectors, predominantly in the London conservation area. So on that note, Natalie, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking, you send off these little bios to things and you kind of don't really think about how they're going to be used. To give a bit more context to that and why I was asked to chair this event this evening, when I first moved over here from New Zealand 17 odd years ago, I started work on The Passage, which is UK's largest homeless facility. That was a project that we worked on as a team for 9 years and really transformed the facilities in Victoria there. And I think it was amazing when we were preparing for this panel, hearing all the speakers talk about their experiences, and it's amazing when you're delving into these community projects, how much your heart goes into them, and the similarities that we all sort of bring to these projects in these wonderful old buildings in different ways. So it's really lovely to be here tonight. Thank you. Introducing our speakers, and we've got the running order up here. We have Sarah, who is Associate Director at the King's Foundation. She joined at the end of 2018, where she's now an Associate Director of the projects team responsible for architecture and heritage projects across the UK. The foundation, at the foundation, Sarah's work includes the restoration of Braemar Castle, a Grade A listed 17th century building and landscape in Scotland's only community-owned castle, along with reimagining of its visitor experience, the repurposing of a large 20th century hospital building into a much needed community facility in Fleetwood, Lancashire. John is the director of John Puttick Associates, an architecture and founder of the practice. It's a studio of creating spaces which are transformative to communities and our built heritage. The practice is working across the UK from our base in London on civic, public and community buildings with a particular focus on creative reuse. Tara Gbolade is the co-founding director of Gbolade Design Studio. She's a Mayor's design advocate and co-director of the studio in architecture practice, specialising in residential and mixed-use developments for public and private sector clients through insight-led placemaking. She's trustee of the UK Green Building Council and sits on design review panels across London, where she advises the council on Mayor's planning applications. And then Anthony up on the board, is associate and architect at RCKa, and works across public, private and third sectors. Anthony has particular experience in community engagement and participatory design. He is motivated by desire to empower and enable diverse communities to manage a meaningful stake in shaping their built environment. So I think tonight we'll hear lots of discussions about that community engagement, that change, that important creative reuse that we have in our communities and how that goes back to community use. So on that note, as you listen to everyone, please take notes because we'll have a little Q&A afterwards. Sarah, I'd like to invite you to say.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here, and thanks Natalie, thanks John and Laura. So as Natalie said, I'm an architect and associate director at the King's Foundation, and we're a charity that works across the UK and internationally on championing sustainable communities essentially. And the work in the projects team is based around urban design, master planning, community engagement. We do a lot of building craft work, a lot of education, and I suppose perhaps what people might think that the King's Foundation get involved in is projects like this, which is the castle that Natalie mentioned, but we're also working on a lot of reuse projects like Fleetwood Hospital, which is the building on the right, which I'm going to talk to you about today. So Fleetwood is a coastal town in Lancashire. It's just north of Blackpool, and it has this amazing coastline on Morecambe Bay, and it really sort of stretches out. It's about 26,000 people. And it's sort of a peninsula. The River Wyre sort of cuts it off and creates this amazing sort of seascape. It was originally a sort of planned Victorian seaside town, planned by Decimus Burton, and there are a few of his buildings still visible in the town, these amazing lighthouses and this great crescented hotel. And it really was a sort of tourist destination when it was connected to London Euston, to the North Euston Hotel. And it was also very much a fishing industry. Fishing town up until the 1970s, so North Atlantic and Irish fishing, Irish sea fishing, and it's safe to say that times have changed and things have moved on, and Fleetwood is definitely the definition of a left behind place. The fishing has gone, the train line was cut, and nothing has replaced either of those things. So the town is now predominantly third and fourth generation unemployment, top 10% deprivation in the country, 20% child poverty, high alcohol and drug usage, and low life expectancy. And really, in 2009, the hospital in the town closed, and that was the kind of culmination of the merging of several NHS trusts and a group of faith leaders, volunteers, business leaders got together in order to buy the hospital and try to do something for the community with it. And so that's when we got involved. And the hospital is almost a whole urban block. Part of the ground floor is 22,000 square foot. And you can see that it sort of had a lot done to it over time. It was originally a Victorian cottage hospital. You can just about see that there. And then the bright pink was an extension by the NHS in the 50s, the lighter pink in the 1990s, and then it was wrapped around at the front in 2003 by this single-storey extension, so kind of completely obliterating the sort of aesthetic heritage that we might see from the Victorian hospital. And it's safe to say, I suppose, that our first impression was it's not a looker. It's got this quite ubiquitous smooth brick, and like I said, any sense of the kind of historic significance as we might perceive it has been kind of obliterated, really. And however, it is a kind of landmark building in the town. It's very different from the rest of the urban grain of this place. And, you know, it's a hospital. People were born here. People died here. A lot of people worked here. It was a really big employer. And so the Trust were really keen to do something for the town with this building. So it has a lot of carbon value, but it has a lot of social value. And I think for us, that was the key thing that we were really keen to sort of harness. So this is what the Trust inherited. It was literally as if the staff had walked out the day before: crockery, beds, curtains, equipment, and everything else besides. I don't know if that's coming through okay. Yeah. So the other thing that we inherited was essentially just this plan, a real lack of building information. And that was from the NHS estate. There was not really very much as-built information, not a lot of facilities information. And so we had to work with this for most of the duration of the project, actually, as we couldn't really afford to do full surveys. And you can see it's a kind of warren of corridors and rooms, really deep plan, so not a lot of light in the centre there. And the bit that's sort of highlighted in darker black is that 22,000 square foot that we were looking to develop as a community hub. So we worked with the Trust and the local community to sort of see what uses would be the most important here, and really it's sort of filling the gap of services that had been stripped from the town and that were now located in other areas where people would have to travel to. So we looked at delivering a food bank, a training kitchen, a community cafe, spaces for small local charities, flexible use spaces. And in terms of the ambition for what the aesthetic would be like inside, I think our original cost plan in 2019 had it at about £2.5 million to redevelop the ground floor to kind of a medium level of fit out. So we really wanted to spend the money internally. So we were kind of conscious as to how to ignite and sort of signal to the community outside that there was a new use to this building. So really we looked at doing simple things like just painting the entrance, new signage, things like that. And then as we started to strip away, we started to see and understand more about this building, finding out where the drainage went. We didn't have a drainage survey. Finding out where the structure was. Hurrah, there was some cross bracing, thank goodness. And also just a mess of services. So that was the other thing that we didn't really have a lot of information on. And obviously a hospital has a huge amount of servicing. And we inherited a lot of, it's not very many pretty photos, a lot of materials. And I'd love to say that we were using the excess material exchange or materials passports, which are fantastic things, but we just didn't have the resource and we didn't have the money or time to be able to do that. Working with a third sector client, it's difficult to fundraise for the building, it's difficult to fundraise for capacity and resource. So actually we wanted to do that, but it's more of a sort of low-tech approach. Facebook Marketplace, recycling, repurposing, gifting to artists if they wanted to do something with it. So this is a very quick timeline, don't need to go through it all, but essentially from 2018 when the Trust bought the site to now, we've got around 2/3 of the ground floor completed, and hopefully we'll have the rest of the ground floor by the end of the year, but then there's another sort of 17,000 square foot above to be developed as and when the money is available. And the money is the key thing. So I think funding for this project has been the most difficult. It's not really attractive to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, even though it is a left behind town in terms of levelling up the border by which the levelling up areas are defined in this area takes in a more affluent town, and therefore it's kind of disproportionately disadvantaged from levelling up funding. So it's taken about 20 pots of smaller amounts of funds to be able to do what we've done, and it's literally been room at a time almost until we got about £1 million from the Youth Investment Fund. And I suppose our role in that has been to help do funding applications as well as doing the planning application and architectural advice. So now we've got Macmillan Cancer Support in the hospital, we've got Blackpool and Fylde College, which are providing the first post-16 education in this town for decades. We've got the first Changing Places facility, we've got the biggest social housing provider's office based in the building, we're about to have the youth hub, like I said, and then hopefully by the end of the year we'll have that training kitchen, the cafe, the laundrette, the community clothes exchange and the garden. Fingers crossed. And this is sort of what it's looking like at the moment, and I suppose it's not necessarily what we'd envisaged, and I think that part of working with a building like this is giving up your preconceptions and your perfectionism and what you imagine the aesthetic of these places to be. Some of it was about allowing the tenants to do the fit out themselves so that we would then give them a reduced rent for 1 or 2 years, and the most important thing was getting this building open to some degree to provide these uses for the community, as opposed to does it suit our architectural aspiration internally? Is it the best interior design that we'd want it to be? Probably not, but actually just, getting it over the line was the most important thing. That's the youth hub at the bottom, which is kind of still in progress as we speak. Lots of weekend working on that. And hopefully I'm all right for time, but just to kind of summarise the duration of these projects. I mean, this has been sort of 5 or 6 years and will be a lot longer by the time we complete it. I suppose we're used to working on projects of that duration. We get involved before sort of stage 0 almost. But, clients and communities and stakeholders aren't used to that. So I think it's really important that we can help to sort of reinvigorate the process as it goes along. And one of those ways was to set this project to students at Oxford Brookes, where I teach, and we set that to them as their first final project in their first year of their MHD. And they came up with 12 amazing projects, and they did things to the building that we would love to do but can't do, like take a floor off the top because we inherited too much space, really. We couldn't afford to repurpose it all. Take a light well out the middle, open up the roof, get light and air right into the middle of that plan. And, it kind of re-inspired the client to kind of rethink again. And even if they can incorporate some of the students' ideas in like a really small way, I think that they will do that. We also are working in partnership with the RIBA, and we managed to get the president to go up there and did a sort of 100-person-ish event there with architecture schools across the north, students, contractors, clients, consultants, stakeholders in the space sort of as it was being retrofitted within health and safety standards. And that was a really interesting and engaging way to also reinvigorate the kind of conversation around buildings like this. And I suppose the other thing to say is that a lot of projects like this rely on the relationships that you build. And, we have a lot of Zoom meetings where everyone looks a bit sad and miserable, like they are here when we're suddenly struggling to get another £10,000 or £5,000 or whatever it might be. But we also have some really great events and, make lifelong friendships with people. And the consultants working on this project now, our local architect who's from Lancaster and our project manager in QS, as well as the CEO of the charity, who's the only paid member of this organisation. So she is the kind of fundraiser toilet roll purchaser, contractor liaison and everything else. They really give over and above of their time, which I think is something that happens on a lot of these projects. It shouldn't do, because obviously everyone's time is worth money. But yeah, and then I just thought I'd end on a funny image of what we all spend. Okay, all right.
Okay, hello everybody. Thanks a lot for coming. We were all a bit worried everybody would be in the sunshine outside the pub instead of here. So yeah, I'm John Puttick from John Puttick Associates. We're a practice based in London, opened the office about roughly 10 years ago now. Since the beginning of the practice, we've been involved a lot with heritage buildings and civic community projects. So I'd like to talk through a few projects that bring those together. The first project that really got us going in this territory is we won a competition to refurbish Preston Bus Station as a very large brutalist building in the northwest of England. It stayed as a transport building, but it does effectively operate as a community building in the city. A lot of people use the building for other things, and we created a new public square that connects the transport hub to the city centre. And we've also been working on a smaller scale. This is a project in Watford in a cemetery. The building you can just see to the side is a locally listed cemetery lodge, which we converted inside to be public-facing facilities and built a new mourners shelter, place for people to gather on these curved benches before joining a ceremony. And we've been involved with ecclesiastical projects, which I think in many ways are community projects. Very often a church wants to become more multi-use. In this case, a project we just finished in Hove, where we built a new porch to open up the building, but also created a community cafe inside, space for a nursery and so on. So I'd just like to try and fly through two projects we're currently working on, both of which are in the early construction stages. Like Sarah, this project is in Lancashire. This is in Blackburn, also in the northwest. And the existing building is one of the UK's earliest electricity generating power stations, the kind of brick building you see there. From the outside, it's really a very nice building. It's sort of the best of Victorian industrial heritage, I think. Very robust brickwork, really great detailing everywhere. Still really in relatively good shape. On the inside, it's been chopped around a lot. It was used as a nightclub, apparently, for a while. It's been used as a soup kitchen, all kinds of things. But this double-height space survives intact, and you can see the beginning of the rail system that runs around the whole upper floor and the crane in there. We're converting this into essentially an employment hub for young people aged 16 to 25. So they'll come into the building through a new main entrance, and that double height space will become a kind of small conference space for events to happen. There's a small cafe, lounge area, place where you could meet potential employers. Then we have a creative maker space with a kiln, laser cutters and so on, and an art studio. And adjacent to it, but sort of run slightly separately, is a youth centre for younger people. But we've sort of got drawn into connecting the buildings together, creating a sort of shared amphitheatre type seating, and then sort of became some other improvements around their building as well. And upstairs, you go up to a new mezzanine, and then there's a co-working space for young people, and then the administration that puts it all together. So from the outside, we really want to celebrate the existing building and not really make big interventions there, opening up a new main entrance to make that kind of brighter. This is right in the heart of Blackburn, but it's quite a long, dark street. So we've tried to do a lot with lighting, also because of the electricity associations of the building, to draw people along there, make it more inviting for young people in the evening. And inside, you arrive straight at this double height space. The crane would be literally above your head where this image is taken from, and trying to bring together, celebrating that industrial building, but also a kind of language that hopefully will be exciting to young people as a sort of dynamic place to visit. So you can see all the way through the ground floor into the maker space. You can see what's happening upstairs, and that leads you on into the other sequence of spaces around the building. This is under construction now. It just started very recently. It's supposed to be finished by Christmas, so fingers crossed. The second project is in the northeast of England, in the centre of Grimsby town. And there's a series of Victorian warehouse buildings. This sort of makes it look quite rural, but this is really right in the heart of Grimsby. The River Freshney runs through the river. It runs through the centre of the town. And there's a series of Grade 2 listed warehouses, starting from one very well intact one at the far end, and then as it went into the middle, they're all kind of degraded over time and in actually quite bad shape. And then as we come closer to the viewpoint here, the end building is also quite good condition. This was built as a maltings originally and associated warehouses, but again, it's been adapted over time. Some of it was used for a billiard hall for a while. So we're working to turn this into quite a large youth centre. There's a very dramatic entrance, it always has been. The bridge across the river takes you into the largest warehouse, and that will become the social hub of the building with a cafe, lots of activities happening. And then most of the functions are arrayed within the existing buildings and trying to draw young people through there kind of naturally so they encounter all the different activities on offer as they move around the building. And the larger functions, there's a new build sports hall, a climbing wall and a performance space which we couldn't fit inside, so they're designed as new build options to the north. So as you arrive in the centre of town, you'll cross the bridge, and here it's essentially, we'll restore and reconstruct the picturesque skyline as those buildings were originally. And as you come around to the north, the new build parts take a kind of stronger role. And we've tried to play with the industrial language of the site, with the sawtooth of the sports hall, but that's also allowing us to bring natural light into the sports hall space and also mount PVs onto the south-facing slopes of the roof. And hopefully it'll be quite a rich series of spaces as you move around the building that will bring together the new build parts. You can see the kind of view through to the climbing wall there, together with restored original brickwork, new timber trusses taking the rhythm of the original trusses, and as you move around, this kind of combination of existing and new design. It's technically a very challenging project. We're working together with a conservation architect on this as well. And a lot of these junctions and getting it all to work has taken really great. We've worked on this now for 7 years, so it's been a really long-term endeavour for our practice. But finally, we're under construction. It's going up on site, so it's been on site now for about 6 months, I think. You can see that they got the shape of the sawtooth just the same as our model, which is very good to see. And there's a big pile of brickworks at the front, but we know where every single one is going to go back. Thank you very much.
Right. Hi. So today I am speaking about what within our practice we know as the music box, which is an existing church, not obviously built originally as a church, and we're working with very closely with our clients on this. So one of the key briefing points, which I'll return to at the end of this presentation, was that we couldn't do anything that was going to trigger planning. And so we took that very seriously to start with. But the building is called the Music Box because of the emphasis that the congregation place on praise and worship. They're a really vigorous and energetic Pentecostal church in Edmonton, North London. And the initial brief for us was to enlarge the main auditorium space. That's the church, and that's how exciting it gets on a Sunday. But it's a building that's used all the time, throughout the week. And it's one that, I mean, you saw the initial picture that, and we'll come to it in a moment, where the building itself doesn't tend to allow the congregation to use it to its maximum potential and its maximum use. So our original brief really spoke about enlarging the auditorium. It sits currently about 160 people, and they wanted it to be 300. And after visiting the building for the first time and identifying some clear issues, we thought it would be incorrect to advise not to retrofit the building as a start before any other design can take place. The church is used by worshippers, congregation on a Sunday, but they have a big outreach program. So they work a lot with young people, with students, and they're also very evangelical in how they approach life. There we go. On the left-hand side is just a screenshot from their Instagram page, and it's very active at all times. And on the right-hand side just shows some pictures of other ways that the building is used. So not just in church on a Sunday, but they really prioritize praise and worship inside the building, outside the building. On the weekends, they tend to open the building up to the local community to have events, so whether that be local businesses or startups trying to sell their goods, or they rent out the space, or they try to rent out the space. The top right image, for example, is where they rent it out for celebrations and for other people to have celebrations. The building is located in Edmonton, as I say, and it's just highlighted in orange there. It's this building that was built originally as a conservative club, social club, so working men's club, and then the church bought it just over 10 years ago. So it was built in about late 40s, and the church bought it just over 10 years ago. From there, they've been using it as a church as and when they need to, but they have a real ambition to ensure that the church building isn't used just for the church, but specifically is opened out more of the day. So as a kitchen cafe throughout the day, they'll be looking at having baptisms within the church, but also to rent it out to the local council, so Enfield Council, we're in here, and the local police for residents' meetings and drop-in sessions, but also pop-up clinics and food bank and distribution center as well. So the existing plan, our role really started with understanding how the occupants use this building. And even though, as you can see, within the auditorium space, that's where it accommodates 160 people. There are so many nooks and crannies to the space, and it just doesn't work as well as they want it to. I'll show you some internal photos at the moment. Some of the windows externally are boarded up, and that's mainly because a lot of them are single glazed. And of course, when they praise and worship, they disturb all the neighbors. So they've like boarded up a lot of the windows, which of course continues to damage the building. When we first started this building, we weren't going to do any intrusive surveys. And so for us, because the client wanted to commence quite quickly, so for us it was important to look at other ways of identifying the existing building construction and then work within that. The proposal, therefore, looks to increase that main auditorium space and allow for an easier flow throughout the building. But what you'll notice between the previous picture, or may not have, between the previous page and this page, is that the wall thickness has increased quite significantly. And here our focus really was about enlarging that main church building and then accommodating new kitchen, plant store area as well. And then critically, the reason the walls have increased is improving the internal wall insulation is what has been proposed here so as not to trigger planning. Walking around the building, some of the existing condition, significant condensation, damp mold, as you'd expect, particularly to the top of the building where you have the parapet wall. That you can see the damp there. The building hasn't been dried out. It never, ever dries out. So, of course, it causes structural damage to the fabric itself. You can see green moss on the bottom of some of the window sills there. The windows are boarded up, which you can just about see on the bottom left image as well. And then we have the single glazed windows, and which are boarded up, and then UPVC. Part of the building had UPVC windows installed, but still really poor energy efficiency. Some internal photos which show some dropped ceilings. There is some asbestos in the ceiling that will need to be taken care of course. But we're dealing with some spaces that, such as the auditorium hall, which are warmed up, have gas heating radiators, and then other spaces which are just cold areas. So there's this real lack of energy flow through the building. The existing EPC is an E, and our goal is to raise it up to a B. What was really interesting working with the clients on this is that they got very technical alongside us. I think we got very geeky, and they were in for it the whole way. As part of that, we did some thermographic surveys because, as you can see from the previous images, yes, let's go back. from the previous images, yes, it's not in the best state, but this allowed them to make really key decisions and allowed us as the design team to help them make the best decisions for them. And this is why we moved away from just a design brief to that retrofit brief. You can see that at the top of, say, the music room on the top left, so the images are on the top and the thermographic survey images at the bottom of them. On the top left, you can see that significant damp that we saw externally, just with us the dark blue line on the top of that image. And I promise you, the church committee were all over this. So we decided to make the approach really simple to understand, and because we're working with a non-technical church committee, everything had to be incredibly visual, which was super helpful for us anyway as well. So the overall strategy was internal wall insulation, and internal wall insulation. We have cavity wall, uninsulated cavity wall as existing. It's a hard to treat cavity wall because its cavity is less than 50 mil, so we'll be injecting insulation there as well. The second key move is the existing roof, turning that into a warm roof to reduce chances of cold bridging. The ground floor is a raised ground floor, and we'll be insulating that as well, and then increasing the insulation above the floor to have a difference in about 100 mil only. And then ventilation strategy, of course, because we now have new insulation, it then becomes more airtight, so ensuring that we have a better insulated and a mechanical insulated approach. At the moment, it's natural, which means it's always overheating. I won't go into this in a huge amount of detail, but in effect, the page before. Anyway, this one talks through the approach we were looking at with the clients, but specifically we got into the detail of U values and U value calculations with them, and they were really interested in it all. We went through the proposal and we showed them directly exactly how their building will use far less energy than it currently does, and how they would be able to save on their energy bills as well. Part of the development was just highlighting to them air leakage, and specifically recognizing that cavity masonry, for example, has some of the worst air leakage, which is that graph on the bottom left-hand side there. And then this is the top image you'll hopefully recognize from Enefit specifically. So I'm talking to them about how we might be able to phase the works. So particularly because we're moving away from just design to now design and retrofit, we've decided to take a phased approach where we'll be looking at the ground floor first and then moving up to the first floor as finances and money allows. As part of our process, we tend to do thermal bridge loss analysis. So looking at the surface temperature and them understanding that it's necessary where we'd highlighted that necessary insulation was accommodated. Again, this helped to support our case. Ooh. Gone too quickly. And very quickly, just ending, the visuals, of course, we used throughout the process, and the community group were fully on board with that. But of course, as all these projects go, as you start to develop the design, we started to explore looking at the entrance, and we thought, what if we had a crucifix that involved, that was incorporated into the entrance? And so that planning trigger, of course, was hit as part of the scheme. So the project is in planning, but is also started on site, and so they're currently retrofitting. The ambition is to complete for the end of the year, but we think probably spring next year. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. So I guess listening to those three talks was really nice. But I feel like what came across to me from those three talks was the kind of resourcefulness that goes into retrofit and using existing assets, which I think chimes nicely with what I want to talk about, because I'm not going to go so deep in a project. I'm going to have a little think really about what I mean by retrofit and what I mean by community, and how those two things come together to be resourceful and be sustainable. So, I mean, retrofit is kind of a bit of a buzzword in the industry at the moment. It's not necessarily clear that people who aren't architecture or building professionals know what retrofit means, but there are lots of words that are close to it. Repair, reuse, adapt. I kind of really like these simple words. And what I really like about these simple words is they kind of suggest a sort of creative tinkerer, kind of a person who makes the most of what they got, relies on their own know-how, makes things happen based on the resources available. So I think there's something really admirable in that. So the moment we start kind of connecting with a kind of existing building or working with an existing asset, we're sort of asking us a question of what do we value? You know, what are we retaining? What are we replacing? What are we hiding? What are we revealing? And we need to ask ourselves our questions, but those questions either also go sort of a bit beyond a building. You know, why are we keeping this building? What are we trying to do with this building? Who is this for? What change are we trying to affect? And so the question of value becomes much larger. And I think you start to ask yourself much more interesting questions about what we value. It's not just about energy, performance, and heritage. It's about job opportunities, spending time with family, a safe place to call home, just some stuff I listed off. And you'll all have different opinions about what you, sort of what is valuable to you. But I guess what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the balance of those and find the answer. And you might quite rightly ask, why is an architect talking about all this stuff? I'm getting too big for my boots. I think I've got too much power. But what I would say is that actually it's the complete opposite of that. The moment I stop thinking about the building and I start thinking about the process that gets me to that output, to that product, I suddenly unlock the ways I can have a really great impact. So I think about design as a process, and what's that process for? Well, I'm trying to understand what a particular local need is. In understanding that little local need, I'm getting to know that community. Then together with that community, we're deciding the tools they need in order to realize a sustainable future on their own terms. And that's the same for the projects we're talking about. You know, Sarah was talking about, how do I fund this building? And you could see all these different funding applications she was trying to do. She was trying to equip the community with those tools. And when I start to talk about architectural design in that process, well, I'm talking about sustainability, aren't I? And this is the headline from the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, which basically says meeting our needs with the resources we have available. And I think that's what's really exciting about retrofit. We've got to stop producing stuff, like critically have to. And like building is part of that producing stuff. So we need to be more resourceful with what we've got. And I think the answer to that is for us as designers to engage in a process that is going to release impactful solutions. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 projects. I'm not really going to talk about the architecture. I'm going to talk about what I think was happening in the process in that project. So this project, this is the one that's actually upstairs in the Retrofit exhibition. It's due to go on site in a couple of months' time, hopefully. Padnell Hall for Barking and Dagenham, right in the sort of far east of London, Marksgate Estate. It's one of the sort of most deprived areas in Barking and Dagenham, in one of those deprived councils in London. They've got a severe problem with youth problems. Whatever. Not that the youth are a problem. God, this is going badly. Back on track. So this is a derelict building that they got money from the Youth Investment Fund to refurbish. So the first thing we did is obviously we went and started speaking to some young people who lived there. And the thing that immediately came across is that these young people from quite a young age were laser focused on what they were going to do with their lives. What jobs are they going to have? What training have they got? What are they going to do? You know, they were like taking responsibility for their own personal sustainability. So, you know, we were in a room with a project manager and a QS and an MEP consultant and an engineer, and we thought, well, we're about to embark on a process here. We're about to all do our jobs to refurbish this building. Why don't we use the process of designing this building as a window to upskill these kids, teach them about our profession, hopefully provide some role models, and get them into thinking about their future careers at every stage of the process, you know, starting with the designing, then the construction on site, then the use of the building itself and the services it's going to provide, and then they're taking control of their own future. So the first thing we did is, you know, the early site visits were with those young people. You know, we talked to them about the spaces that were there, how the building interacts with the neighbourhood, where the entrances should be, the quality of those spaces, what the different uses might be, what uses they might want to see in there. So those kind of strategic design moves started to be influenced by those conversations with young people. And then we did a whole series of workshops with them, sort of bigger workshops, smaller workshops, sort of one-to-ones, trying to focus on particular tasks. And basically we were trying to tease out the design of this project with them You know, they weren't doing the design for us, but equally we weren't doing the design alone. And so the things we learned from those young people unlocked a design that we would have never come up with on our own. The thing that we keep returning to, and my colleague Anna, who's on the project just there, is this thing they keep talking about, the Kinder egg. The idea on the outside is quite smart and formal and presentable, but then you crack it open and there's a surprise on the inside. So that came through in our whole, you know, the building's reclad, it's doing all the stuff that Tara sort of just talked about, although I don't have the technical knowledge to talk about it, but we're sort of overcladding it, and on the outside it's smart, and then you go through these really bright, welcoming gates, and there's all the spaces inside. We also learned about the young people's relationship with their neighbourhood, and maybe the neighbourhood didn't trust them, maybe they didn't trust their neighbourhood, so they wanted a space that felt really welcoming, but when they were on the inside, they also wanted it to feel protected and safe, so they didn't want a lot of outlook, they didn't want a lot of windows, actually. So we designed this building around a series of courtyards, which meant that they had breakout space and safe space, but that actually it was their space. And again, I could talk about that project at length, but the process there was about using the process to educate these young people, and hopefully some of them will go on to get careers in construction. In fact, in 2 weeks' time, 8 of them are coming into our office to join us for some work experience with the contractor as we move D&B to keep them involved in the process and hopefully tease out some more fantastic design. The next one is the Granville in South Kilburn for LB Brent. This was a sort of old church hall. The issue with this building was actually that the council found it a pain in the neck to manage. It was a 1,200 square metre space. They didn't know what to do with it. It was a security issue. They weren't running the maintenance properly. It was sort of half used. And yet, don't worry, you don't need to understand this diagram. There was this whole world of people in South Kilburn who wanted to do good work and needed a space to do it from. So the process of this project became all about negotiating between the needs of these different users so that they could be combined within this space. And for example, the challenge I always talk about is there's a kind of workspace creative hub trying to get people in South Kilburn to sort of start their own businesses. So on the one hand, you have someone who's trying to present a professional front and start a business. On the other hand, you have a really vulnerable group of elderly people who just need somewhere warm to hang out during the day. And so how do you negotiate bringing in your new client to that kind of environment? So there was a lot of conversation that went on, and basically it was effectively master planning the building, thinking about access, circulation, movement, how that all works, so those different users can work together. And I think there was a lot, as a naive architect, being like, yay, community building, everyone together. It was like, there was something nice about having that challenge, and be like, well, actually, who is the community? Who has the right to say what the space is for? Who has control over it? And it was a meanwhile project. That's the kind of enterprise hub in the Churchill. It was a meanwhile project, and now Brent are investing in it to make it into a permanent building, and that sort of proves the sort of impact of it. And then the final one is Nourish Hub in Hammersmith and Fulham. This was a derelict post office. What happened here is that there was a food rescue charity called UK Harvest who were doing great work. They had fantastic connections in the City of London with some good, sponsors. But they were based in Chichester, basically rescuing food and teaching about people about food poverty, or teaching about good food cooking to tackle food poverty, excuse me. And they wanted to use this space in Hammersmith and Fulham, but they didn't know the community. They knew nothing about the community. The community didn't know they were coming. There's a real risk of sort of a mismatch happening there. So the purpose of the process on this project was to embed UK Harvest in the community before the building even opened. So on day one, and that's me and my colleague Tom, we went out and we painted the shutters to show, we mean business, we care, we're here, we're investing in your community, we're trying to make it look better already. And that was really great, because we were on the high street and people would wander up to us and be like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we're the architect, we're opening a food kitchen, are you interested? Is this something you need? Would you like to volunteer? And immediately making that connection. A few weeks later, in front of the nicely painted shutters, UK Harvest came, did what they did, we gave out some free food, and again, we began to build those connections, find out who the local organisations are, build that first pool of volunteers, understand that there was a genuine need and that there was, clear food poverty in the area. We also did some nice fun things, like in exchange for a free meal, you had to tell us your favourite dish. And so we had this lovely list of like Persian recipes and jerk chicken and Polish food. And it was a really nice way of talking about the sort of like diversity of this neighbourhood without having to like revert to crude metrics. We literally had like the recipes of all these different cultures. as the project went on and we were designing in the office, of which I'm going to tell you nothing about that design, because I told you at the beginning I was going to talk about architecture, you know, we were developing those links. So that we met some young people from the youth centre nearby. We had a graphic designer on board. So we were like, fine, in the Easter holidays, we'll run a graphic design workshop. We'll teach you about composition and arrangement and graphic design with food rescued from Shepherd's Bush Market. So we did this kind of like fun pattern thing, which you'll see in a minute, became the identity of the space. Meanwhile, we also spent time with UK Harvest, going into community centres around London, understanding how they deliver their training sessions, and think, well, okay, how does that work? How do they interact? What kind of environment do we need to create for these sort of teaching people about how to cook more healthily? And that all then fed into this kind of final space, which you can see the kind of mural from the graphics and the sort of tiles from the graphics, and this project just sort of fills me with joy every time I go to it. Like, you go here on a lunchtime, and I swear to God, it's the most diverse place in London. It's like more diverse than the Tube, because the Tube, you need to be able to walk. It's like like opposite, you've got Kensington and Chelsea, people coming in for like business lunches, and on the other hand, you've got like adults, like really vulnerable adults with maybe difficult learning challenges, who are in there kind of every week for lunch, because it's welcoming, it's friendly, and they're out in the community. So it's really, you know, the power of that process, and they're doing amazing work now they're there. And so I guess I just want to kind of leave it on that thought, this idea of just sort of tying all these threads, like retrofit, like making the most of what we've got, sustainability, making the most of what we've got, working with communities, making the most of what we've got, and this just idea of this just wealth of value that is around us, that if we can sort of just harness creatively, then we can have really incredible outcomes because of those processes. That's it.
Just while everyone's taking their seats, thank you so much. That was really amazing. I'll ask a question that will kind of hopefully tie this together a little bit. I've got these sheets of paper here because it's just how I am. I was at a charrette on Monday morning, which was grouping together a lot of people from the built environment. And so there were planning officers, and there were leaders of boroughs, and I was there as an architect. And it was about focus on health. And it says, we must center everything we do around the experience of people and their needs, the imperative for our built environment to improve human health, and via this, our relationship with planetary health. And so there's sort of this need for sustainability and equity and inequity, and the access to infrastructure, open spaces and transport. There's place quality criteria that we have to consider in these spaces, and it's individual, it's rational, and it's societal. And through creating these kind of spaces, and lots of the words that you were using were about trust and welcoming and safe and warm, and those are the things that bring socioeconomic benefit to creating happier, healthier spaces. And I think all this work that we do is actually sort of, we think about the immediate needs of the community, but that larger and wider impact that has is amazingly important. And so my question was going to be, and Tony, you spoke about this a lot really in terms of that process, but I think of when we're architects and we're used to working on commercial projects with quite there's a budget that we're trying to meet, and there's a list of spaces, and there's a square footage that we need to achieve. That commercial project has kind of a different sort of a brief. I think a lot of the times when we're working with communities, there's a brief, and Tara, you spoke about this really as well, I think, that that brief isn't really defined. And I think as architects, we have to work with our clients to help them define that brief. And so I was just going to ask, just as a starting question, and then we'll open to the room, and please just pop your hand up and we'll bring a microphone to you. And if you could introduce yourself first and give us a bit of context to your question. I was just going to say, can you, each of you, expand a little bit on that forming of a client brief when the client needs assistance in understanding the impact of some decisions or the restrictions that the building might have, but also that stakeholder engagement, and so shaping that brief around what the needs of the community are. Is that?
Mike.
I'm not sure I'm going to start, actually.
Shall I? Is this working? Yeah. Well, I'll have a go. So in terms of brief building, I think for community projects, we have two quite different sets of clients thinking about it. We certainly have one client that builds youth centres around the country. They're extremely well prepared. They've got a brief that they know what it is. They're trying to deliver in different places. So in a sense, they know what the brief is. I think the challenge working with them sometimes is then you work with local groups of young people who want to bring quite different things to it. And normally when we've spoken to young people, mostly what they're interested in talking about is what they can really do in a building. They're interested in the architecture and things, but mainly it's, what can I do here? Couldn't we do something else? And they have different ideas. And with that client, it's sort of almost trying to open things up and allowing the local young people to bring things to the table. We do definitely have another set of clients where they're not typically involved in building projects. They're a kind of more local organisation that's doing this may be the only building project they're ever going to do. And often they don't have a well-defined brief. And yeah, we spend quite a lot of time then at the beginning trying to build that with them. Sort of basically spending time there asking questions, just normal day-to-day stuff, trying to build it up. But that is obviously it's really worthwhile to do that, and you can find out so much just by spending time with whether it's a young people's organisation or a church or whoever.
I've thought about what I might say now. When I put that one slide together, I wrote design as a process. I think I really deliberately chose design, not building or not architecture, because I do think there is some sort of superpower in creativity and design, actually. And I think, it was really nice to follow after the week when we were talking about this, weren't you, about your colleagues in your office who you rely on for technical advice, which absolutely is fundamental to achieve the outcomes we're looking for. But I think there's something about an architect as a kind of professional generalist in this kind of early stage brief making process that certainly I find that's where personally I would bring the biggest value, and I think many members of our profession, because of that design and creativity background, would bring the greatest value, which is why I'm about to leave architecture, in fact, to go client side and work for a council delivering community hubs, because I just think getting the brief right is fundamental, and John's the first thing we do is we tend to end up questioning the brief, and we get into sticky water with clients sometimes. In fact, that Padnor Hall one, the B1st one, I talk about the engagement. I'm really proud of that it was very hard. They didn't want their brief challenged. They had architects in the client team. They decided what they wanted, and it was like, so in some ways that was a bit of a technical exercise delivering their brief while then squeezing every ounce of value out of the process. They're not here, are they? They should know, it's fine.
I'm probably not going to quite answer the question, but we did quite a bit of work in helping the Fleetwood Trust to get a consultant to do a business plan. And I think the really important thing with that building is probably if it was in a secondary city, definitely if it was in London, it would have already been probably a popular Peckham-esque pop-up space or something, that was already probably delivering a lot of great output. But in somewhere like Fleetwood in Lancashire, where it's really difficult to get to, the infrastructure isn't there from a transport perspective, we really had to work with them on the business plan in terms of thinking of the future of this building. It's okay to refit it now, but how long is it going to last? And trying to get them to think about maintenance has been so difficult, and trying to get them to think about putting that into their business case and really plan for the future. And they're just thinking about next week and next month and who's the next tenant. But actually the other thing has been, as other people have said, having vulnerable people in this building with so many different complex needs, and thinking about routes around the building in a safe way and working that through with them and working that through with community groups has been probably one of the key things that we've done. Yeah.
I really loved your question, actually, because you spoke about that refining of the brief and health. While my presentation was quite technical, a lot of the decision-making came down to health and understanding the occupants. Within a church like that, you have so many older people, you have so many young children. And so speaking to the clients about this movement away from just enlarging our whole space to we need to retrofit this building was fundamentally because we started to discuss health. We said, well, actually, old people get ill, the young people are going to get ill. They're going to have those colds for longer. They're going to pass that on to other people. So a lot of the decision making that moved the brief from straight architectural design to retrofit was around health, actually. And throughout that process, I think because we gained that trust at the outset and had those conversations at the outset, because we spent the time in trying to understand exactly who was using the building and how they hoped the building might be used in the future, further decision-making became far more straightforward because they recognized that we had fundamentally their best interest at heart. And it was very much a health driver. And I think that's also why they bought into the technical responses. They actually just wanted to know. So we were involved with a lot of their committees to get a design through. It has to go through the church committee where we have presentations, and that goes to their regional bishops, that goes to their national bishops, and you know. So, but it all started with a really strong health conversation at the outset.
Amazing. Thank you very much. We've got a roaming microphone. Who would like to ask the first question?
Easy.
Hi, I'm Chrysanthi from Young Architects. I very much enjoyed the projects, and seen some very inspiring examples of community engagement. What struck me was Sarah's dilemma in having a whole lot of materials in the building that you took over, and you came up against obstacles to reuse. And you found some creative ways to reuse. So my question is, I guess, to everyone is, what do you think, in your view, is an obstacle for reuse of materials in buildings?
I think one of the images that I probably put in and then took out, well, there was all the sanitary ware, obviously, at the end, which, you know, at the end of the day, this is going to be a public building, vulnerable people, but also it needs to be safe, it needs to be hygienic, it needs to perform in a certain way. But we also inherited an awful lot of fire doors that I think the NHS had just drilled into and fixed signs, face-fixed signs to, and the intermittent strips were probably all gone and everything else. And you know, how do you reuse something like that? How do you get a manufacturer back to make all of those things good, and also the money in order to do that? So I think warranties, insurances, you know, there's only so much you can repurpose from an artistic perspective or in a kind of innovative way without actually having all of those sorts of guarantees, really. I think especially when the Fleetwood Trust as a charity running this building are going to be responsible for the safety of the people in it. So I think doors, sanitary ware, things like that, all really difficult. I'm sure there's probably projects out there already that are able to be used, but that's been a challenge.
I guess one of the challenges perhaps with this particular project was, you know, I'd say typical architectural design actually is a challenge because because when you're thinking about retrofit, you want to retain every wall. And so when you're thinking about expanding, say, an auditorium hall, there's only a limit, there's a limit to how far back you can go, for example, because you want to meet another existing wall rather than knocking down a wall to build a new wall. So having those conversations has been a challenge because sometimes when they're like, no, we want the kitchen in this spot, then I think we have to accept that we win some, we lose some. And so therefore, if we are going to have to demolish parts of the building, then I think for us it becomes about where can we reuse this material then within the same building if we have to remove parts of the building. So, yeah.
I was actually reflecting on what John said about being a tenant of this building and refurbishing it, even though you're not the landlord. And it got me thinking about the expectations we have of our buildings and our duty of care towards them and what maintenance we expect to put into things. I know you think about this a lot, because in your guys' work, and I think maybe there's some, you know, we've created a whole culture of like warranties and guarantees and life cycles, which like 25 years never seems that very long anyway, does it? And it's just, how about like, well, I'm giving you something and actually probably next year you're going to need to repaint it. But don't worry, because in 10 years' time you're going to be really attached to it and you'll never throw it out. You know, I feel like there's a bit of an attitude change, isn't there? And it's, I mean, again, maybe that's the reality of why I end up doing fairly low-budget, fiddly retrofit projects, you know, the person who just wants to repair things, and why I get slightly frustrated with architecture at scale, where it's just how do you get past the sort of the warranties and the building controls and the insurances to a different place where we talk about a different attitude to how we look after our assets.
So I'm going to say something about bricks, because I showed that big pile of bricks, which I sort of made a joke about, but obviously we are trying to reuse all the bricks, because partly for the sort of embodied energy of the brickwork, but also because of the heritage nature of the building. But that project's been going on for 7 years, and the reason it's taken so long is mainly because of, a bit like Sarah, establishing funding from different places. So during that time, there's the parts of the building that are in bad shape have got in worse and worse shape. And whereas at the beginning there was, the local authority had a contractor looking after the site, they were putting bricks, tagging them properly in big containers, they were all locked away and things. At some point that stopped, probably around COVID basically, that all kind of stopped happening. Timber trusses were found all over the place, bricks were everywhere. And just the length of time of a building like that not being properly looked after and degrading is a real problem for us. So now with the contractor who's doing the rebuilding, we're having to, and actually they're desperate for bricks because they have, you know, they're obliged to build lots of it with the original bricks. So we're all trying to sort of make that happen. But it seems a straightforward thing, but it's been a really complicated process just to manage the bricks on site and make sure that they do go back into the building and so on. So I think that just the time of some of these projects is an obstacle in a way.
Sorry. Thank you. Hi guys, my name is Boris. I work for GSS Architecture. I guess my question would be primarily to Anthony or Tony, sorry. But working within a community, you always come with challenges where that it be budget or just finding out exactly what the people want. How do you, and my question is, how do you mitigate the disappointment from the aspects of design that you can't incorporate into whatever you want to build in the end? Especially working with children like your first project, the one you discussed. How do you kind of mitigate disappointment for kids?
Maybe I'll answer the kids one separately. I mean, I think mitigating disappointment is just being really, really clear on what people can influence. So, for example, at the moment, we're doing this project in Weston-super-Mare. This is an amazing venue that used to be a Lido that sticks out into the sea. It's called the Tropicana. Some people might be aware of it. And we're turning it into a music events venue. And actually, there's various practicalities involved with turning it into a music events venue, and we're getting advice from operators, and it needs to be commercially viable, and we need to make sure we're able to lease it. So there's not really a question to ask the community, what would you like the Tropicana to be? However, the moment you say you work on the Tropicana, there was this like flood of like, oh, I remember, and oh, my nan, and like, you know, from all across the country, people are contacting us, and you realize, oh, okay, so the thing about the Tropicana is about people's memory of place. And so on that one, we're working with an artist to do an oral history project, which is then going to hopefully capture some of these amazing stories. And the artist is embedded with us from stage zero, from the brief stage, because he's actually going to work with a local college, and I don't know what it's going to be yet, but basically part of the building, we call it something special because we don't know what it is at the moment, something special is going to come out of this oral history project and will be part of that building. Like one idea we talked was like the best sunset in the West, just like an amazing roof terrace where you can watch the sunset, designed by an artist coming from an oral history project. So like, I guess I'm going off on a tangent describing the project, aren't I? But my point is being very, very clear on what people can or can't influence. On the young people, God, I found the young people really terrifying on that project. Do you remember? It was the teenagers, I lost. They're a problem. Yeah, I'm not sure I have some pearls of wisdom on the young people. Maybe like it's the same thing as anything. Yeah, like honesty, just be clear about what they can influence, enjoy spending time with them. Yeah, I don't know. I actually would quite like to hear John's answer to that question because particularly that project in Grimsby is like that's like super ambitious. But it's taken 7 years actually. Caveat.
The young people have grown up now. While I don't know. Avoiding disappointment is a tricky thing to talk about, really. Well, again, I think they mainly, as I said earlier, I do find it's generalisation, but I do find that young people are really interested to talk about what they can do in the building. So in that way, generally, they're very excited, and I don't think we have found that well, certainly they haven't told us if they've been disappointed about it. We did a project in Croydon, which is a new build youth centre, and we were involved a lot with the young people there. That opened in 2019. It was just amazing to see how many people came along and used the building. And I think it is more that suddenly they've got a facility that's a space specifically for them, that they can identify with that building, they can go and do things there. And that's really fantastic. And particularly if you've got groups who are involved, I mean, that is broadly very rewarding, I think, to be positive about it.
Anna, DB3 Architecture. I've just probably coming back to the first question. In the light of the decarbonizing all the estates and seeing so many underused existing buildings, what apart from the fundings you think would boost this process within the NHS trusts or the councils?
Oh, goodness, yeah, it's a really tricky one. I mean, you said apart from funding. I mean, the funding issue, something else that plays into that, I suppose, is procurement, speed of procurement. And also, there's a huge ambition in Fleetwood to make sure that local jobs come out of any work that we do. But as soon as you get a big pot of money, then trying to give a small local company a bit of that funding in order to meet the metrics is really, really challenging. So I think streamlining procurement would be a really good thing that could come from government. Obviously, VAT on refurbishment and work on existing buildings being cut would be a huge place to start, because then that would incentivise and also some protection against demolition generally. But those are like the really big questions, I suppose. But support really, just as much support as local organisations can give, and time really is the key thing. But speeding up these processes, I suppose, speeding up applications, speeding up access to money. Yeah.
If I just add into that as well, I think the passage when I worked on that, within the planning we had permission for anyone developing within Westminster to assign half of their Section 106 payment to the refurbishment of the passage. It's a funny thing now, because you can't really do that because it looks like biased use of your Section 106 payment. But it did mean that very large developments in Westminster were very, very happy to know where that payment was going and the good cause that was coming out of that. So there's somewhere in the planning system with those payments, if they can be assigned in some way, that it isn't in the same kind of application for a grant or the Lotteries Commission or anything applying those grants, it actually comes from the planning, and then that's looked at being more of a proactive use of the funds. So that's a difficult one. We sort of talk about planning and health coming together, and should it really come into planning policy a little bit more to address some of these spaces and to encourage that reuse? Oh, there's somebody just standing.
Hi, I'm Camilla Parsons from Whittaker Parsons Architects. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed hearing about all those projects. I'm always interested to know how those projects came about and how those clients found you. Were you embedded in the community? Was it part of an invited competition? Over to you.
So at the beginning of the talk, I was talking about the project we did at Preston Bus Station. So in a way, I think for our practice, almost everything has come out of doing that project in one way or another. So generally find as an architect, most of the work you win is through working with people who then go on to work in other places or what have you. So that was it was an open competition to refurbish the bus station, and there are three components: refurbish the bus station, create a public space, and there was a third component that was to design a youth centre. So it was a very rich brief in a way, and especially with the Grade 2 listed building had a kind of heritage aspect. So our work in sort of youth projects started with meeting the people who were going to use that youth centre. Now that didn't actually get built, but we got to know them very well. We enjoyed working with them. They had other people working in that area and so on. So it's kind of like sort of spread from there. And then we're because of the public nature of those projects, a lot of the time we're doing public tenders, but we're looking for, I suppose, then similar things to having built up some specialism in working with young people or creative adaptations of historic buildings. So we tend to go for those ones which are kind of cold going in, we're going for something that we know very well. But generally, I think it's more from working with somebody who then moves, or that happens so much of the time.
I mean, sadly, our one's public procurement, actually. Just getting all those 3 projects were through public tenders. I think they were all invited in some form or the other, so either we're on a framework or we're being invited. Obviously, that's about how good you are at writing a public tender, not necessarily about anything else. So, yeah, I mean, we were having a conversation when we were, before this, when we had our pre-chat about the cost to a practice of doing these kinds of projects. And now that you've asked that question, these guys, they were all a bit like, they were sort of, there's a lot of time and effort and upfront that's gone into that. And actually, I said back to you all, actually, I found we're able to deliver them all on our not the best profit margin, but on a profit margin as a private business. And now I'm reflecting on that is maybe it's because we're coming in through it for the private procurement, through the public procurement, so it's set up as a proper project. I'm now reflecting on other projects, smaller ones, where I've gone out, reached out to local community people in the community and helped them, and it's ended up being, basically pro bono. So, if you're coming from how to get into it.
Yeah, ours is quite different. I mean, I was in a private practice prior to joining the foundation for about 11 years, and we did lots of tendering and so the usual routes. At the foundation, as it's a charity, and because of who our president is, often communities that might have a building that don't know what to do with it or don't know how to start would maybe perhaps write to him or us as an organisation and see whether we can help. And at the time when we started this project, we had a small amount of sort of seed funding that we could provide to the community to pay for that business consultant, for example, and also we just then provided architectural services up to planning, and we covered that within the charity under the funding that we had for this particular series of projects. Granted, it's lasted a lot longer than we expected it would. We had COVID in the middle, and now we're sort of client advisor. We have a local team, we have a local project architect, but their fees, I feel like, are long since spent, and they put out chairs and were fire marshals for me when we did our RIBA event. They hoovered, they put up walls, they go and go to the building when the fire alarm goes off because there's only one other key holder. They do everything, and they love it, and you can see that. But you're quite right. We discussed this before that every person's time is valuable, and it shouldn't be that way. And I don't know how we change that really, because this is also a charity, and they're struggling to fundraise for their own resource. There's only one full-time paid member of staff in the charity, so as the number of tenants grows, that will need to change, but finding money to fund those staffing places is also difficult. So slightly different way of dealing with it.
Generally, within our practice, I think probably about 50% of our projects are public tender. With this particular one, we were invited to, after we hosted an exhibition, I think this time last year, and we spoke or presented some of the retrofit projects that we were working on, and got speaking to someone who we didn't know would turn into a client. And then it took a good 6 months anyway before it turned into a tangible project, for which we were invited to look at. So, yeah.
Anyone else who think we're closing? Oh, very quiet. Fantastic. What was that?
It is almost 7:30 if no one else has got a question. It's up to you.
No, that's fine. I think, John, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Really, just thank you, Natalie, John, Sarah, Tara, Anthony, and thank you all for coming. If you want to continue the conversations, if you don't mind just going upstairs to the Retrofit exhibition, it gives you an opportunity to look around. And also, we just need to get this room ready for an event first thing in the morning. So,